Before starting work on Pacific Rim, Guillermo del Toro had what you might call his time in the desert. He spent years developing projects that never happened. He moved his family halfway around the world just to move back 2 years later because a studio went broke. He negotiated with special effects companies to fit within a budget just for another studio to cancel the whole project. And in an almost biblical fashion, he came out of the desert and delivered his biggest hit of all, Pacific Rim. This time in the desert shaped both the man and the movie. Now, I'm not saying he wouldn't have put as much effort into the movie if this project came along sooner, but I am saying after all that frustration, there's a particular kind of gusto and creative release that flows into a project, and that's written all over Pacific Rim. Hello and welcome back. I'm the Big Shot Critic, and today I want to tell you Guillermo's story, his time before the desert, in the desert, and after the desert, and how that shaped Pacific Rim into the very special movie that it is. Guillermo del Toro started as a special effects man and directed his first two movies in 92 and 97, then really built momentum from 2001 to 2008 when he directed and released 5 films in just 7 years. And the second to last one was nominated for 6 Oscars and won 3 of them. If anyone's career was looking unstoppable in 2008, it was Guillermo del Toro's. In April 2008, it was announced that Guillermo would direct the 2 upcoming Hobbit films with producer Peter Jackson. The first one would be very much a Del Toro movie with Del Toro visuals, and the second one would transition and align with Peter Jackson's existing trilogy. As I mentioned earlier, he relocated his entire family to New Zealand for this project. It wasn't a permanent move, but it was a 3-year commitment just for these Hobbit films. Earlier I said this project never happened, and I stand by that. Del Toro's Hobbits would not have been anything like the Hobbit trilogy we have today. Think Ron Perlman as Beorn. I'm not really heartbroken about missing that. But imagine Brian Blessed as Thorin. That alone would make it an entirely different movie, and one I would like to see. Remember a few videos ago when I told you MGM's financial struggles almost destroyed the entire James Bond film series? And remember I told you it seemed like they were going bankrupt all the time? Well, guess which studio's financial struggles led to the delay in The Hobbit to the point where Guillermo had to pack it in and go back home. That's right, MGM. After 2 years of working on the script, the designs, the sets, the props, the casting, the costumes, and the digital effects, a 3-year commitment became an indefinite commitment while Uncle MGM quits drinking and finds a sponsor to put him in rehab. Del Toro couldn't take it anymore, so he split. And as you can imagine, he was pretty heartbroken. On top of all the work that would never be realized, he hadn't gone more than 2 years between shoots since the 90s. I feel I have to stop here for a moment because I know some of you might be thinking, oh, boo-hoo, he can just cry all the way to the bank, right? He had work, he got to spend 2 years in New Zealand with his family, he's already a millionaire, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not going to say you're wrong. You know, ordinary folks, that happens to them too, where they relocate and something doesn't work out. I get that. But I think we can all agree that no matter who you are, that's painful. And my main point anyway isn't, oh, look how sad for him. My main point is how it affected his work on Pacific Rim. And we're getting to that. Just 2 months after departing The Hobbit, in July 2010, Del Toro announced he will be directing At the Mountains of Madness for Universal, with James Cameron producing. This would be adapted from the H.P. Lovecraft short story of the same name, and Tom Cruise would be starring. Now, I've read this short story, and it's hard to undersell what we missed out on here. Just the collaboration between Del Toro and Tom Cruise is already interesting enough for me. Although we did get Legend back in the 80s, and I feel like that's not far off. Anyway, Universal agreed to a $150 million budget and an R rating. Guillermo set about getting everything ready. He negotiated with ILM to get the effects within budget. He He set up production offices. He had the crew all ready to go. The script was revised to everybody's satisfaction. Some say it's the closest a movie came to cameras rolling before the plug being pulled. Universal got cold feet about the budget and the R rating and canceled the project in March 2011, this time with production just days away. So close Guillermo could taste it. It has now been almost 4 years since he has been properly behind a camera. This guy wasn't only heartbroken, again, he was hungry. He says he wept all that weekend and that he's never done that before. You can imagine getting that close to something you truly love after years away from it and it's gone, just like that. It hurts. But he also said that Mountains of Madness was canceled on a Friday and he signed on to direct Pacific Rim the following Monday. He was already involved with Pacific Rim as a producer and had already negotiated to take directing duties if his schedule changed to allow it. One might conclude that he was giving himself a little insurance after the New Zealand situation. And so he started work on yet another movie, and this is where you really have to admire this guy. He was not phoning it in. After 2 heartbreaks, you'd think he'd be a little hesitant, maybe morose, a little cautious. But no, this guy was clearly giving it everything he had. When Del Toro speaks in interviews about this quick pivot, he talks about how such a perfect opportunity felt like a lifeline to him. He's loved monster movies since he was a kid, and he was so excited to instill these simple pleasures into Pacific Rim. Pacific Rim feels so much more mainstream and spectacle-driven than his previous films because he viewed it as a chance to let himself fall completely in love with movies again. All his other films are dark fantasy, or at least dark, and that's because for this one he had to become a kid again. He had to let his hair down. He had to forget for a moment about speaking through his movies and just fall in love with filmmaking again, for his own sake. Of course, it's not just spectacle. Like all good movies, it has an emotional core. And what is that emotional core? It's about 2 people opening up again after being hurt. He was opening up after being hurt by making a movie about people opening up after being hurt. Good drama always comes from somewhere real. In pre-production meetings, he asked the design team to think of the kaijus, and even the Jaegers, as luchadores. Each needed not only its own look and feel, but its own style, flair, and almost everything short of walkout music. They were designed to have their own attitude and body language. And my favorite detail he wanted, each one had to be designed so that a man could conceivably perform it in a suit, like an old-school Godzilla movie, even though they were computer animated. That's brilliant. Del Toro would not let his designers speak in terms of existing designs from other sources. Again, this is for the monsters and the mechs. He wanted the mechs design to reflect their home country, and he wanted the monsters to all have some design connection to Earth animals, not totally alien. In one of the interviews from the DVD, he mentions the pageantry of kaiju films. And I feel like that's the ultimate key word for the direction he took for all the design and all the action set pieces of the whole movie. None of the design or action ever feels overplayed or like a wink at the audience, but all of it feels so performative and created with an audience central in mind. It takes itself seriously, but it loves pleasing the audience. And the action is top-notch. I don't know what it is about horror directors that makes them so good at action. Well, okay, I kind of do. But the point is, the action is really good. You'd think it'd feel like a Transformers movie where it all feels so played out by the end, but it's not like that at all. The style of each fight is different, so is the tone and the setting and the players. But the best part is the stakes. Del Toro has such a mastery of rising stakes and knows exactly what this movie needs to the point that it's edge of your seat, but not exhausting. It's a very undemanding movie that you can just pop in and watch on a whim, but it's also very thrilling. People don't realize the skill it takes to do that. Raise the stakes too much, too fast, or too soon, people tune out. Raise the stakes not enough, too little, or too slowly, and people check their watch. Not only does Pacific Rim raise the stakes at the right time every time, but it always feels earned, and it always arises so naturally from the story as well. So few movies get it that right. With the dialogue, Del Toro really takes a less is more approach. He even talks about it in the commentary and says the main character, Raleigh, actually has fewer lines of dialogue than many other characters. He's meant to be a proxy character for the audience, yes, but it's also a minimalist thing. Del Toro also said that the hardest thing about making this movie was keeping it simple. He wanted the characters to be more like symbols in a way. In the commentary, he constantly refers to them as stock characters, saying that in genre filmmaking they must be stock, which is why the dialogue is a lot like George Lucas dialogue. Simple, earnest, and a little on the nose.
Her heart. When's the last time you saw it?
In a long time.
Why do they have to be stock? Simply put, it's because people came for the robots and monsters. This movie's meant to be enjoyed by children, but also it's that pageantry. Something about pageantry is that every character on the stage has to be iconic and instantly recognizable. That's iconic in the very literal sense, as in it has to represent an archetype that you can immediately recognize. The leader, the hero, the protege. Yet another triumph of moderation in Pacific Rim is the ending between Raleigh and Mako. They don't kiss at the end. They don't kiss. I'm not going to say there's no romantic energy at all, but that's just it. That's why I call it a triumph of moderation, because you just don't know. And the movie makes it okay that you don't know. Because they opened up to each other and they trust each other, which is really the point. They can both trust and hope again. They healed each other. Maybe this is a good time to talk about Thomas Tull, because I was about to say the studio must have been breathing down Del Toro's neck trying to get him to have Raleigh and Mako fall in love. But Thomas Tull was in charge of Legendary Pictures at the time, and he is the exceptionally rare studio head who actually has a fair bit of understanding about the artistic process. Thomas Tull founded Legendary Pictures, and his time there was glorious. I always hoped he would inspire a new generation of major money men who understood the art, but sadly that didn't happen, and he just retired and sold his company instead. His name will come up in my next video as well. What that has to do with Del Toro coming out of the desert is that Del Toro had wanted to work with Thomas Tull and Legendary Pictures, and that's why he was able to pivot so quickly to directing Pacific Rim after At the Mountains of Madness was canceled at Universal. I don't think a sci-fi original. I don't think an original sci-fi of this scale could have been made without Thomas Tull. And that brings me to my last point before we wrap this up. Pacific Rim was a financial success, but made most of its money overseas. The Chinese loved it. The Americans liked it, but not as much. And if you look at the numbers, there's some indicators there that word of mouth was not as good here in the United States. But if it's such a great movie, then why is that? I think it's because it's a totally original sci-fi. Let me be clear, a lot of people say Americans are always asking for original sci-fi, but they never show up for it when it comes. I don't really agree with that. Pacific Rim is a really fun movie that you walk away from, and if somebody asks you how it was, you say, yeah, it was really good. You don't say, oh my gosh, it changed my life. In the summer of 2013, if someone tells you that the new Iron Man movie was good, you're going to go see it because you loved Iron Man and the Avengers. If they tell you that the new original property sci-fi that you've never heard of was really good, you might rather bank your money on the Iron Man movie because you know and love it. That's what I did. I didn't see Pacific Rim until my roommate had the DVD. Anyway, that's my theory. People say Pacific Rim is a love letter to kaiju films, but I don't think it's a love letter at all. I think Guillermo del Toro put himself into filmmaking rehab by making a movie with everything he loves about movies. And we are the beneficiaries of that. That said, it needs a rating, and I give Pacific Rim 8 out of 10 commandments. For those of you just joining us, Pacific Rim is episode 2 in Big Shot Critic Season 2, Monster Mash. And that means we need to give it its Monster Mash score. First is the rating, 8 out of 10. Second is the creature design. I'm giving Pacific Rim 9 out of 10 there. Third is overall special effects, 10 out of 10. And fourth is how many people did the monsters eat? You could make the argument for 5, but for very clear and certain instances, it's just 1. Even though he did survive. So here's that Monster Mash score. These will all be scientifically compared at the end of the season to find out the best monster movie. Trust the science. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I really appreciate your time. To catch up on Monster Mash, check out the playlist. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.